If a man you thought was dead came back, not for revenge, but for justice. Sounds like a legend, right? But in a lawless town ruled by fear, one mysterious rider changed everything. Who was he? And why did his enemies fear him more than death itself? Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn you never saw coming. Dear listeners, before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. The town of LaHood sat in a dusty valley, its once thriving community, now strangled under the grip of corruption. The miners, once hopeful dreamers searching for gold, had become prisoners in their own land, bullied by men too rich to care and too powerful to be stopped. Every morning, the town woke up to the same harsh reality: their land stolen, their homes burned, their voices silenced by the merciless lawman who answered only to coy LaHood, the man who owned everything. And then he arrived. A solitary rider, his coat dusted with the journey, his hat pulled low over his face. No one knew where he came from. No one knew his name. But when the townsfolk saw the cold steel of his revolver and the ghostly presence in his eyes, they whispered one word in hushed voices: preacher. He wasn't just another gunman. He was something else, something more. And LaHood's men had no idea what was coming for them. The arrival of the mysterious preacher sent a chill through the town. The miners, beaten and weary, looked at him with both hope and fear. Hope, because no one had ever dared stand up to LaHood and his men. Fear, because they knew what happened to men who tried. He didn't speak much, but his presence spoke for him. Strong, unshaken, dangerous. Word of his arrival spread fast, and it didn't take long for LaHood's enforcers to come looking. They rode into town with their badges gleaming and their guns ready, men who wore the law on their chest but had no honor in their hearts. At the center of them was Stockburn, the ruthless Marshal LaHood had hired, a man with cold, dead eyes and a hand that never missed its mark. The miners stepped aside, watching as Stockburn and his deputies dismounted, their boots crunching against the dry dirt of the town square. Preacher was standing outside the general store, his gloved hands resting at his sides. He didn't move, didn't flinch as the group of men spread out in front of him, their hands drifting toward their holsters. Stockburn narrowed his eyes. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low and even. Preacher didn't answer. One of the deputies spat onto the ground, taking a slow step forward. "Maybe you didn't hear him, stranger. You're in the wrong town." A long, heavy silence followed. The wind kicked up the dust, swirling it around their boots. The town held its breath. Then Preacher finally spoke. "No," he said simply, his voice as calm as still water. "You are." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning Stockburn should have listened to. But instead, he smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and stepped back. "We'll be seeing you real soon, preacher." He turned on his heel, his deputies following, mounting their horses. As they rode away, the tension didn't lift. If anything, it settled heavier over the town, because everyone knew what happened next. Stockburn wasn't a man who let things go. The fight was coming, and this time it would be a fight to the death. The sun dipped low over LaHood's valley, casting long shadows across the town. A silence hung in the air, heavy, expectant. Everyone knew what was coming. The miners worked without speaking, their pickaxes striking the earth in slow, tired movements. But their minds weren't on gold anymore. They were thinking about the man in the long coat, the one who had stood unshaken before Stockburn. Some whispered about him. "He's got the devil's luck. No man faces Stockburn and lives. Maybe he ain't just a man. The legend of the preacher was already growing. In the town, Preacher sat alone in the stable, oiling his revolver with slow, deliberate movements. His hands were steady, his face unreadable. But inside he knew the truth. Stockburn wasn't just another hired gun. They had met before, and Stockburn had killed him. At least that's what he thought. The past wasn't buried deep enough. The door creaked open, and Sarah Wheeler stepped in, holding a lantern. The young woman had seen enough loss in her life. Her father's land stolen, their home burned. She wasn't afraid of much anymore. "You should leave," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Stockburn and his men will come at sunrise. LaHood's paying them double to finish you." Preacher didn't look up. "I know." Sarah hesitated, stepping closer. "Then why stay? You don't owe us anything." Preacher finally met her eyes. "Maybe I do." Sarah studied him, searching for something in his face. "You can't stop them alone." Preacher slid the revolver into his holster. "I won't have to." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He stood, stepping past her toward the door. "LaHood and Stockburn think they run this town. Let's see if the town agrees." With that, he walked out into the cold night air. The battle for LaHood wasn't just his fight anymore. It belonged to everyone. As the first light of dawn crept over the valley, the town of LaHood braced for war. The miners stood together in the streets, axes, rifles, and whatever weapons they could find gripped tightly in their hands. Their fear was still there, but something had changed overnight. A spark of defiance had been lit. For years, they had lived in the shadow of LaHood's greed, too scared to fight back. But now, they had a man who wasn't afraid. A man who had already died once and come back. From the ridge beyond town, the sound of hooves echoed. Stockburn and his 6 deputies rode in like executioners, their dust-coated coats hanging heavy, rifles strapped to their saddles. Behind them, LaHood himself watched from a safe distance, his lips curling in amusement. "A fool's last stand," he muttered. Stockburn pulled his horse to a stop at the center of town, his dead eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't here for the miners. He was here for one man. Then, from the shadows of the stable, Preacher stepped forward. His long coat drifted in the breeze, his revolver resting at his hip. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had already seen how this ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Stockburn sneered, "I should have put you in the ground the first time." Preacher's voice was calm as the morning wind. "You tried." Stockburn's eyes narrowed. A flicker of recognition passed through his face. Was it doubt? Was it fear? Then, with a quick glance toward his men, he barked a single word: "Kill him." The moment the first hand reached for a gun, Preacher drew. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence, and in an instant, the town of LaHood became a battlefield. The first gunshot rang out, and in the blink of an eye, chaos erupted. Preacher's revolver barked twice, and 2 of Stockburn's deputies dropped where they stood, their bodies hitting the dirt before they could even draw. The remaining deputies scattered, diving behind barrels and wagons, firing wildly toward the lone man standing in the open street. But Preacher didn't flinch. He moved with the precision of a man who had done this before, a man who had already faced death and returned. A 3rd deputy poked his head out, rifle aimed, but he was too slow. Preacher fired first, sending the man tumbling backward. The miners, watching from the edges of town, stood frozen. They had never seen a man move like this. But then they saw something else. LaHood's men weren't unstoppable monsters. They were just men. and men could bleed. And just like that, the townsfolk took up arms. Rifles cracked, pickaxes swung. The battle that had been years in the making finally began. The end of Stockburn. Stockburn remained standing in the center of it all, his eyes locked onto Preacher, his face unreadable. Even as his men fell around him, he didn't move. He had known this moment was coming. Slowly, he unholstered his revolver, not in panic, not in haste, but with the cold certainty of a man who had made his peace with death. But Preacher, he didn't even let him draw. 6 shots. One for each time Stockburn had tried to kill him before. Each bullet struck home, and Stockburn staggered, gasping, his revolver never even leaving its holster. He looked at Preacher one last time, as if finally understanding who he was, or what he had become. Then he fell. Justice served. A deep silence settled over LaHood. Stockburn's deputies were gone. The last of LaHood's hired guns fled the town, leaving their horses behind. And from the ridge, LaHood himself watched in horror. He had lost. He yanked his reins, turning to flee, but Preacher was faster. One last shot echoed through the valley. LaHood slumped forward in his saddle, his body falling into the dust, and just like that, the nightmare was over. The town stood still, as if trying to grasp what had just happened. The miners, men who had lived in fear for so long, looked at one another, then at Preacher. He didn't speak, didn't wait for thanks. Instead, he turned and walked toward his horse, the setting sun casting his long shadow over the town he had just saved. As he mounted up, Sarah Wheeler stepped forward. "Where will you go?" she asked. Preacher tipped his hat, his face unreadable. "Where I'm needed." And without another word, he rode off into the horizon, leaving behind a town that would never forget the day the dead came back to deliver justice.